Okay, thanks so much for coming out. Pleased to have you here for the occasion of Nevena's solo exhibition, Three Moments of an Explosion. Nevena Prijić, born in Belgrade, Serbia, has shown all over Europe. Recent solo exhibitions in the States have been held at M&B and Mrs. Gallery in New York. We'll be talking with Orion Martin, hailing from Sonoma, CA. Shows with DeRoja and High Art. And yeah, incidentally, the two of them have also been studio mates for years. So I think it's an excellent conversation to have about the evolution of the work, which this is sort of like a spectacular leaping off point from previous bodies. So yeah, thanks for coming. Nevena, Three Moments of an Explosion. Can talk about the title and how it relates to the work.
Yes. Well, first, I also wanted to say that I really respect Orion and his work, and we've been studio mates in the same building for like 4 or 5 years, something. And I was working on one series of work that was like slightly different than this. And while I was working on this show, Orion saw me in the studio kind of through the open door and saw the new work, and we started like commenting and talking about it. He seemed excited about it, and we had a lot of talk about it. And so then I asked him to actually be, have this conversation here. And I'm actually, it was kind of means a lot, especially when you're changing your work, to hear like that. It's like, okay, going in a good direction, because it's always a little bit stressful how people are going to take it and react to it. And so the title, Three Moments of Explosion, I like because it has like a rhythm in it, which I'm always like thinking when I think about my art. It has like this almost like rhythmic, like momentum that happens in life, almost like in evolution and goes through time from like the past to the future. And the three kind of reminds me of like the birth, the life and death. So it's like this endless like cycle of life, like things are happening. And like explosion also has this like destructive motion that is like something like ends, but it always something comes out of it. Like there's like a death and birth. So it's kind of like how finding some like big themes and meanings in like simplest of things. Either those are like chemical processes or just like in a gesture that, like each one of these gestures has like the whole world within. And so how like we see the whole life inside it. That was kind of like the main meaning of the title, I'd say.
I'm curious to know or hear a little bit more about how you came to this new way of making images. You can kind of, it looks similar to previous bodies of work in certain ways, but I think the consensus is that it feels much more open and looks in some ways quite different from previous bodies. Can you talk about how you generate
Yes.
these images?
Well, I feel like it took me maybe like around 2 years to really, with a lot of like trials and errors, to figure out. I think like with the previous work, I got to the moment when it got very like condensed. As I was adding more elements and experimenting more, it started kind of almost like becoming too like stiff, and less of that like a movement and the kind of like the gestural parts that I had in my drawings, because I always start with drawings and then I have these like linear drawing that then I like project onto canvas and like fill in with information. And once I started adding more and more information, I started losing the drawing. And then I started thinking like how to like kind of maintain that gestural like freshness, so to say, from the drawing, is maybe recreating it on the canvas and preserving as much as possible in it. So it kind of took a while to really get to that even idea to like, why not just like recreate the whole drawing onto the canvas? First, I started like doing the same thing with the color pencils, and then doing color pencils onto the canvas. There's actually one of the older works in the back office. If anyone wants to see that later, it's like in the birth of right before the series. But then the color pencil would leave the texture of the color pencil. And I wanted a kind of waxy look and the transparencies that I would get on Mylar paper, which is that transparent paper. I'm going to show you later. Yeah, so this is like one of the examples of the drawing. It's not even like completely accurate, but sort of like that is for that painting. So it's basically each one of these is like different sheet of Mylar paper. Some are completely transparent, some are matte. Then there will be this like cutout shape of the card, kind of like a paper cardboard. And depending on a paper, the transparent one is really good for ink. And then the matte one is good for color pencil and pencil. So there are like different techniques here. And then finding the composition is like a challenging part, but also very interesting because there's like endless combinations and possibilities, but also finding the right one can take a long time. Because they all kind of have to fit together. They all kind of have to feel like, oh, initially it's like very messy and complex, and almost kind of like in life, I'd say, like there are parallels. Like in nature, there's like so much going on and feels chaotic, but somehow everything works together like a perfect mechanism. So it's a little bit like once I find it, it's kind of like a revelation, like, oh, here it is. You know, it's like everything fits together. Like this is right where this will go, and this like continues onto this, and so on. And then of course I crop, like this part was not in the, it's like getting editing almost. Like I think it's interesting with the part that's solid that you can edit out some parts of the drawing. But it is, I like to maintain kind of like the spontaneity in the work. So when you're finding someone, like you can discover things, like it's not so set in like, I don't know, it's like a moment of discovery and surprise.
You
That's
know, some of the things that you're saying about like piecing it together like a puzzle or having a composition that is like, on the one hand, chaotic, but also sort of strangely all works harmoniously together. Reminds me actually a little bit of your work, Orion, in the sense that you're like collaging sort of like disparate elements, but then they all sort of achieve at the end like a kind of strange cacophonous
new thing,
like,
yeah.
new form. I'm really curious to hear your perspective like on the work and on the process.
Nevena is like the hardest working painter of any, like I paint a lot and she paints more than me, so that was always impressive to me that she would just be there clocking a lot of hours, and more so than most people, I guess when you're around it you see it, but she really like paints through every iteration of the thing, and seeing her go from like these very kind of stiff, like cement looking kind of statuesque symmetrical things, and like slowly bringing one element asymmetrical, and then it would like respond, and every like move was a whole painting. And then there was like a string that everything kind of hung on for a while, and it was this very like slow process to get to here, which after they went from being these kind of like artifacts, cementy looking things, they kind of look like bugs to me.
Oh, the series before, yeah.
And then it was like asymmetrical kind of bugs, and then it was kind of like all over bugs, and then there was a string bug with
just the line
with
bug.
shadows, and then this very much feels like the squished bug, like the death, which you said.
Yeah.
And but now it's kind of like in between glass, kind of dead bug, where I think, but everything generates like a whole painting for you.
Mm-hmm.
Where for me, I think I'm skipping around a lot more than that. Like I don't have the kind of patience to kind of like one small thing generates a full painting. I think I'm trying to like slam things together on one painting, I think is more my kind of route. And this seems pretty like you make the composition and you kind of photograph it and you kind of like that's the painting. Mine is more like I'm drawing on the painting the whole way through basically and kind of collaging onto the painting. And I do like photoshopping stuff, but sometimes I'm photoshopping what I painted to try to give me like a map of it. So it's not as kind of like pre collage then go. It's more collage, 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 cover up what I don't like, you know, like squeeze it through to the end until I kind of like get to a point that I don't know what it was supposed to look like. So it's collage, but I think it's a pretty different kind of, like it's not collage over here, it's collage on here.
Yeah, which is like a harder way and slower. You know, it's like takes longer and you don't know like what's going to happen next and you keep covering. But I like in your work that it's all visible still. You can see the under layers of the drawing. Sometimes it's hard for people to picture that online, but I saw your work in person and you can see all the drawings underneath and the looseness of it. So it is part of the process. Ultimately, it's not just like I made a mistake and I'm editing.
I mean, I try to make it look not like I was moving things. I try to make it look like it was always meant to be. Like I want my process to be more like this and be like I made a choice and then I painted it. I want to like look confident, even though the way I make it is anxious and kind of confused. But the goal is to look like set in stone.
Yes.
Or, you know, like statuesque in a way that it was always meant to be like that.
But like ultimately what Kyle was asking, like the parts that you pick also, like it's almost like my parts, the one on its own doesn't mean that much, but once they're put together, like they create this whole other meaning. For me, it's almost like a Frankenstein, almost like you have like these body parts or something, and then you're like making the whole new body. You know, it almost has to do with that like evolution, or I don't know where we're going. I think of that like the future and so on, like taking parts and like constructing almost like a robot or something, and you kind of have that too, even though it's more like based in reality or like images that you find online.
Yeah, I was thinking when I was coming here about like being like having a facility with painting where you're not butting up against the material of paint. This is like going to be a long-winded thing. Bear with me. But so if you like, like you're good at painting, you seamlessly went from like acrylic paintings to these paintings, and there's not like there's no friction with that. And I guess I'm someone who has like a pretty good facility with paint too. So there's a bit of a like, you have that thing down, and especially in like abstract paintings, a lot of what you're seeing is someone butting up against like a material, and there's like this material thing, and there's like gestures, and there's these things that are like this physical paint thing, and you're not doing that, and I'm not doing that. But there's like, so then it becomes about what you choose to paint becomes the like the friction and the tension, and I guess it's like, you know, for me, I just paint stuff from the internet or just pictures or just, you know, I'm just mashing up pictorial crap, and you've chosen this kind of like abstract painting thing, and you're kind of forced to play with the elements of pictorial stuff, but instead of choosing like a school bus and a dog, you're choosing like this paint thing.
Yeah.
I guess it's a weird thing that facility of paint is a kind of like limiting thing in a way. Like I don't know how to say that better than like, you're not seeing the paint, and the paint kind of goes away, and the painting part of it goes away, where you're kind of looking at an image, and that is a kind of weird problem. And I think could be a reason why a lot of people like don't like paintings, or you know what I mean?
Like you mean like the gesture kind of disappears of like the way it's painted?
Like the friction with material kind of goes away, and with abstract painting, especially like this, that's a big driver of a lot of paintings, is this kind of like friction of material and how it's moved and how it's manipulated and stuff like that. And that is kind of like a non-issue in these kind of explosive abstract paintings, which is an interesting thing to kind of like remove from the thing, and then it becomes about these like behind the scenes choices, which is a kind of interesting figurative way to approach abstract painting, which is much closer to my style of painting, which I think I find interesting and is a weird abstract painting problem.
Yeah, like a lot of the like charge of abstraction comes from this like libidinal like trace of the thing, where you like made some giant gesture and you like you almost like feel the like persistence of the subject, like moving, doing this dance.
Well, it's like that in figurative painting too.
Yeah.
Typically I think of people having friction with the material in figurative painting, it kind of gives either like you think of that being kind of like bad paintings, or like paintings that are like unskilled or something like that. There's like that friction of material. And I guess when you're in figurative painting, there's kind of an assumption that there's more facility with painting. But with abstract painting, there's this, like, the friction is the painting. Like that is the thing. But of course it's in, all kinds of paintings, like that friction is the beautiful thing about the figurative painting, but there's this kind of assumption that there's like more facility with painting. Is this interesting?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
We'll find out at the end.
Yeah, we'll run the credits back. But I think like what you're both like driving at, which I find so strange about these, is that like it feels like they straddle two moments or two kind of like facets, where because you're working from reference material that's so like, yeah, you're able to be quite gestural in the source material, but then in the rendering of those sort of like very immediate like marks on into this like greater scale, there's like, it's almost like contracting or like actually like expanding time, like slowing it. So like looking at these, at least to my eye, I find them to feel sort of uncanny, like, because I do read this as like this giant like ink stroke. Yeah, like a giant brush made this. You're like splattering, you're like more like frenzied, but then as you like move into them, they're so much more like slow and studious and like reflective, and that to me is like what I find to be one of the more interesting tensions. You talk a lot about discovering like new ways of painting to emulate these materials. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, well, so like first they're made like really fast on like this, as I just showed, like a small papers, and I almost kind of, they're more successful the smaller they are, because they're more like condensed information within, and then once they're like blown up, like I see kind of like after putting under the microscope, like what's happening inside, all these like line and dots and so on. So it's kind of exciting to have the material and look at it then bigger up close, like a gesture of the ink on this Mylar paper, which is also kind of adds certain thing because it's on plastic. And I also kind of flip it on the other side, so it feels like the ink that is like kind of stuck to the other side of the glass or something happened to it. So it's not just kind of like, it's the material didn't absorb it, it like stays on the surface. So like kind of like recreating all those different modes that look like these like chemical reactions that happen in a simple gesture, and then studying it, it's like exciting like anything else. If I find that I was most of my life actually figurative artist, and every time I would paint like a hand or face or arm, I was always like the most interested in like what's happening inside, like all those different, the colors, the lines, like this whole world within. I think now it's just not contained by that shape. It's more like kind of open in a way, just exploring that. Squished.
Well, I think that's the most, like, to me, that's the most compelling thing about it, is that you really kind of like define this line work, stylization in previous works, and that you have maintained all of the same quality of that like drawing style and the kind of inner working and the colors, and you've kind of like, you have a definitive line quality. And in those older paintings, there was a lot of like a kind of signifiers of paint. There's a lot of like an airbrush and a spray can and a drip and a thing that was very like, this is the paint, but there was this like dominant line quality and dominant drawing style and kind of color sensibility that was very, you know, you had really honed it. And then as you kind of like spilled over the edge and everything became asymmetrical, and then it became this, and then you just somehow switched to oil paint without even like missing a step at all. I think that the most compelling thing is that you maintain this kind of form invention in there, even though the dominant thing is the spills and the splatters and the kind of like signifiers of accident.
Kind of felt more like a classical painter, and then used the brush and oil, and then when I wanted to like find my own way or something, experiment, and then I had the phase that didn't really use brush, or how it would be just like more like splatters and airbrush and a little bit some lines and things, so that's why I guess it wasn't hard switching, but those kind of textural experiments were like interesting, and I think now I have them here. It's just that now rendering them in oil, but I'm doing some of the similar things that I did before. That kind of, where's like I left it behind.
But there was always like
like these things, that was this yellow sheet, for example. This yellow was just on one sheet on that of the ink. Like I made these circles with like dropping alcohol on them so they kind of expand and have this sort of like a chemical thing happens. And like even these lines are kind of from the brush stroke. The one on the orange will kind of line like 10 white lines. I scratched those initially with a knife.
Like after the ink dries?
After the ink dries in a little plastic sheet that was just scraping, and there was the big form kind of spray airbrush. So it's like I'm reusing some of those same techniques, but now they're like the references for my oil paintings. So like all that is almost kind of like accumulated, like a knowledge or experiments for this. And there even like I was always drawn to transparencies for some reason, like the light and the transparencies, how they overlap. There's new colors, that new things happen. But I was doing that in like using light acrylic, the fluid acrylic, so you can see through, you can see the light.
But you're also
now it's basically like literally putting the pair. It's kind of like the same things, but like finding like different methods.
But you were like kind of rendering transparent forms, and it was like, it looked
Right.
like it was made out of
On canvas, right? Like,
yeah, it looked like it was made out of stone, but there was all of these lines that kind of like indicate these kind of transparent,
Right.
symmetrical forms.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave way from going from like ancient artifact look to bug, mosquito kind of look, because it is a kind of natural transparency. Like bugs have those kind of, the wings and all that stuff. It kind of was a natural progression of transparency, and it was kind of like an inner energy kind of rendering kind of thing going on too. And then the as they got more asymmetrical, they got flatter too, and the box, the painted box became a plane, which then got broken up with shadows, and the transparency was kind of moving, and there was kind of solid forms intergoing. So there's always been this kind of like transparency thing, and this is like the canvas has now become transparent, which is a kind of another, it's like it's another progressive step of transparifying this flatness that is all literally in a series of paintings, which I find very impressive about your work, is that you don't skip a step,
Thank you. Well, it's also funny. I feel like most people didn't see my even older work where I painted figurative, but I had these models that were like covered with plastic and distort their bodies. There was always this kind of like skin and like silicone or something. Like there's something like artificial that I'm drawn to, but also like organic. And I think now it's just like almost like trying to find ways where it's there, but it's not so like on the nose, you know? It's like people can't reinterpret it and like find their own, define it, or doesn't have to be like this is like insect or this is this, you know? It's kind of like you can feel. I don't know. Someone told me about this, the black one that is like the ink, like oh, it's like a vertebrae, and you know. And I still see bodies everywhere, even though they're just brush strokes. It's just paint, but it's also kind of like an ode to painting itself because it's about the paint and the materials. So it's like getting through all those, the whole story that I'm interested in. Like there's related to science and pollution and so on, but it's also like through the eye of a painter.
I see.
Yeah.
I see like makeup ads, and I like that about it a lot. It's got a very glossy magazine makeup ad. I grew up in a hair salon, looking at a lot of magazines of products, I guess, and it has that kind of like quality of like a shampoo ad from of an era with the kind of like cold gray with the kind of goopy thing. It's very makeup to me, and I like that.
And it's probably because I grew up on magazines as well, like consuming the ads and the slickness of the looking at the human body, or as a woman, probably like the obsession with beauty and the body and the evolution. You kind of like see things through the eyes, It's just like when I was younger, it was kind of more like obvious, Now it's, I don't know, it's things change and you change as a person, but certain things stay with you.
It's kind of like a Moreau painting made with like makeup.
Right.
Yeah, and it was also interesting the way that you're like chasing certain kinds of like qualities of like reflected light as you're photographing them, like seems to harken back to this idea of like a commercial image space where like, oh, you want that perfect like sloping highlight that like cuts through. So like in one of those smaller ones, actually like the studio lights and a fleeting image of you taking an iPhone photo of the composition is
Yeah. Well, I
was
actually
like,
have those like because someone asked me the other day like to show the actual images. This one I showed already. These are the photos of the drawings. This was the drawing of that one, and you can see the differences. Couldn't recreate it because it was interesting thing happens, the reflection from the ceiling, basically the studio lights, or I didn't know exactly what these are. I've been like chasing them to see what would happen, like all those like pipes and stuff. I don't know exactly where they're coming from, but yeah, I think like my hands would be there, like fingers holding the camera. And because this mylar, this paper here was black mylar, and then on top was this one, the other one, so it has this kind of glossy effect. And then photographing that, there's like all these dimensions that would happen like with the drawing and the reflection and the one here. And I think like that's what a lot of people also find appealing when seeing the work, which was the most surprising to me. I would think, well, it's like the smallest painting in the show, and it's like the least color, but there's something about that kind of uncanny like reflections in the light that is also not really clear, but it kind of works together again. Like this almost looks like a gesture, but it's not. This was the part of like one is I think finding those like surprising things and making work, but they still align with like your interests, but you're like discovering things that you can use.
I think that's something else that like interests me about it. In my own practice, I'm always really interested in how like so much of art ends up becoming like what's on the wall, where I'm like quite attracted to the way that like art ends up, like it's just like, oh, I gathered this lint and it got packaged and now you can look at it.
Repurposed.
Yeah, but then we make so much lint.
Right, no one notices
We're just all
it.
constantly shedding it. And so it's kind of curious to me and interesting in a certain way that like you can see different forms like iterating themselves throughout the paintings, like this blue like airbrushed piece of cardboard, like, or like that mark.
Reuse.
Yeah, it feels like I like cultural productivity and like artist practices that feel like an Ouroboros, where it like eating it's like constantly digesting itself and then like, you know, kind of like birthing itself anew. And so I guess, you know, when you talk about like discovering it, what I find so interesting is that you're finding something that you made that's like somehow given to you outside yourself. It's like a transmission like from you, either in the past or the future. Into the
Well,
present.
those little pieces of the cutouts were also kind of happened by accident. I didn't really have an idea like, oh, it would be good to have a shape and cut it out and put it. I just have it in the studio laying down. Particularly the first one, this is one of the first paintings, the kind of gray round shape was from my previous series when I was airbrushing. So I had a cutout that I used just to mask a part on the painting, and I was kind of holding it with two fingers as I was airbrushing on top. And those two fingers kind of made this little cool, like, kind of trace, like another shape. And I just kind of used it for this. And once I discovered that was like interesting form, I started making more kind of like on purpose. Like, okay, this is actually kind of interesting and cool. And then because the system of the drawings and paintings is like moving them around, making new combinations, and almost like similar to Ryan with images that you find online. I'm just like playing around with these basically parts and images, and I can reuse them because they don't really sit like this ever. They're just like a bunch of different papers, like in like different folders. But then I can take like one or like make more, and because on every painting, if they're reused, they use completely different. They look different. They're either different color, or I can remember now which one they turn different color, they're different orientation, flips around, and they just don't really look the same. So why not?
You know how like people talk about like the further from like the more distance you put between you and a thing, like it gets colder, or I don't know if it's a saying, but you know what I mean? Like that there's like a distancing is like a coldness. I think it's interesting how cold these paintings seem, like in not in the distance way, but like in a lighting way. They have like a coldness to them, like a cold studio lighting kind of thing. And I think that's an interesting layer when you're talking about like the source material and the distance of where it's coming from, instead of this like invented form, which is what you were doing before, which is very like inner energy feeling, and they were kind of more canvassy, and you could kind of see the material a little bit differently, and then they had a kind of warmness to them, and these have this like decidedly cold lighting thing, but also it's a distance thing, and I guess I find that satisfying about these, the kind of, and I think that's where the magazine kind of makeup thing comes from, is the kind of cold lighting of them, and it's an interesting in combination with the distancing of like reference and stuff like that.
I mean, I guess I kind of like them to look a little bit like they're like on a table in like a lab setting or something. And they do sit, usually I have this like white table, and I lay them all there. And I like using the whiteness of that table and like slight differences. Like on this painting, I kind of kept that right corner, and the bottom is just gesso. So I realized that's kind of the whitest part of the painting. I'm not even going to use the white oil on top. I want to kind of have that like emanating white, like kind of makes a difference even with this wall. You start noticing when I was making these works of like different shades of white. It's like all these different tones. And then I started being drawn to that, like this like slight shift, you know, that makes it more kind of feel material in a way. Like you feel like the thinness of it, almost like skin or like a layer of something that makes it maybe kind of like artificial in a way, but also like organic and physical. I don't know what is it about it, but it's like exploring that was really interesting, and I kind of want to get more into it. And then when I was layering more of some of those sheets, some would get blurrier and blurrier, like would get kind of underneath. So having those changes too, as like the blurry with the sharp and like the different of those like textures that happens, that still kind of feel like, as I'm thinking as like a figurative artist, but in like a sense of like creating abstract work. So it's not so much, it's kind of studious in a way. It's not so much of like emotional abstraction. Like I feel like every time I try to just make an abstract painting like directly on a canvas, and like it just did not, I don't know, it just didn't work. You know, it's like I'm not capable of doing that yet. I kind of have to like plan it and organize it and study it, you know. Like I can play in like the on the drawing or some parts, but then I have to like, you know, yeah, it's like put it together. Yeah.
I think I'm really drawn to this one in particular because of the preponderance of edge work that's happening. Like I'm it's like, yes, you are like revealing in some ways the process and how the images are made, as opposed to this one where, you know, as opposed just except for this like one
The edge.
you know, you're sort of fully immersed in a scene. But I'm like less attracted to that, more so like you're talking about this, like the way that the material that's sort of, it's not incidental, but it's like you're not necessarily cropping these things. But it ends up making this kind of like Mondrian, like it orders the composition in a way that feels satisfying.
The paper itself.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And this one you can see a lot more what you're talking about this like kind of the way that like these minor shifts in depth, because I mean all of this is happening like, you know, at like a millimeter thickness. You can see the result of that though, which is something that feels really like you're looking through a space, which I think is so interesting. My background's in photo. I love the way that photo can really collapse and
kind of merges everything.
Space. Yeah, it really can flatten and make everything feel like it exists on the exact same plane. Where like painting, on the other hand, has this like tremendous capacity to like breathe dimensionality into minor like forms. So it feels like there's these like kind of two things like butting up against each other, but then going in separate directions. Like the photo, like the layering and the photography of it, like all like lumps it together and kind of like compresses it, squishes it squishes it. But then with the paint, you're able to like breathe this kind of
it's definitely using that the photo quality of it. That's why it's not like, oh, I photographed and then just take the part that is like a drawing. It's actually the photos use like are part of the process. So every shadow, every paper, the materiality of it, even like some reflections, like this one has like a little white reflection. It's almost like an abstract work becoming material or turning into like a physical object, but it is abstract at the end of the day. It's just paint on canvas. But it's, I guess the things are happening in our minds, imagination, adding to it. And a lot of things that get into the photo itself by accident. So things happen here that were kind of like outside of the main focus that I would have. I would be like, oh, this is interesting. And then maybe I found it. I take a lot of photos of like different combinations. But once I open in a computer, I see that things that kind of by accident are in the frame. And like this, for example, this kind of violet on the right corner with the kind of cross paper happened to be there because I had this, it's just this whole table is like paper. And then once I saw that, you know, I mean, it is part of your, as an artist, it's also noticing things that you find interesting. So maybe I didn't do it intentionally, but you know, I was like, I'm gonna definitely keep it there. It's like a lot of things here happen like that too. They're like accidentally in the frame of the photo.
Don't you think it's a weird impulse that I also have to decide at some point that you don't make a mark on a canvas, that's like illegal in your thing, like you don't have an organic gestural mark, that once you like remove that as an option, you spend the rest of your artistic life seeking out some kind of like accident, like you create, I mean, I do it all the time, it's like you're trying to like kick over cans in your studio to like make a thing because you decided at some arbitrary point that you don't make marks. As someone who makes marks, you know, it's like it's a weird contradicting.
Well, it's like those are the exciting things, you know, like finding things that happen by accident, and you feel like if I didn't plan it, it's like something probably pretty good, you know. It's like we're like, oh, if I made it, you're always like suspecting, you know, how good is this? But if it just happens to be there and like, ooh, you know, this is like so interesting. I don't know, and it's probably like an exciting discovery. But
are there like confident people who like have who skip, like are there people that have like that skip over that whole like accident thing and are very like
probably
defiant with what they want, and it like I mean, I know there is, but it's like it's an interesting.
I mean, it's kind of also try when I'm making. I guess this is also kind of like a big step for me, even doing abstract work that I never thought I would be doing. My whole life, I actually didn't have a confidence to do it. I only started making abstract work during the pandemic, and I felt like I wouldn't be able to. It's just not going to look good, or how to do it. I'm just so used to painting something that I see. And even though I would kind of, you know, distort it or do things to it, I never thought I would be able to just kind of like not think and do it. I feel like I'm like too controlling. And then I don't know, I was just kind of pushing for some reason. I felt maybe I was jealous of people who can do it, you know, and like didn't maybe consider myself a real artist if I didn't try to able to have a blank canvas and just do it. And then I started experimenting, and of course they didn't. I think that therefore all this the evolution, because I was trying to like figuring out things. But now I found something in between, like, oh, I'm like still kind of like I'm gonna paint what I see, but it's gonna be my thing, you know. Like I don't know. And then maybe one day I'm gonna be more like here. It's like splash on a canvas. I don't know. Me too. Okay. No, but yeah.
Like that's a great one.
Yeah,
That's
it's
a
great.
place
It's
to-
now people can just like fire questions at us. Okay. Well. Okay.
You mentioned the physicality of the work. I thought that was really cool, and I really admire like the transcendence that I see in like the scenes. But I was also curious about your process, like when you're making the smaller works. Is it because you mentioned like being like Frankenstein? Does it feel more like you're a scientist kind of creating things, or is it meditative, and how does that change once you shift to the canvas?
Yeah, I feel like the energy is much different. It's like that part is it's exciting, but it's also frustrating in a way when I'm making drawings, because sometimes you like really want to find it and discover it, but it's not happening. But there's also a fun part, sort of like while making each one. I think why I like the system is that I don't have to think about each one as like it has to be perfect or finished. I can like make drawings and not think and be very spontaneous, and because I know at the end maybe I'm just going to use a third of it, maybe just this little corner, maybe that part is going to end up being useful, but not all of it. I think that's like something I forgot to mention is I used to play classical piano, so I studied very classical piano, right? Like Bach, Mozart, and so on. So like I was playing somebody else's music, but I learned like maybe that's how I got into real like kind of discipline, but learning technique and how to play. But I never really composed. and didn't have that spontaneity of creating something. And then I was living with a musician and composer, and he's also jazz composer, and he did improvisation a lot. And seeing him just like sit at the computer and use softwares and the keyboard and just start from one tone to the other, and then the whole composition emerges. Like it was amazing, you know. And the kind of, which I think it happened a lot in abstract expressionism too at the time in New York, that they were like very like close together with a lot of musicians and jazz musicians, and kind of inspired them to. So that's kind of like my vibe when I'm like making these little drawings, is like try to like not think really and just like go. I think it's more kind of like, oh, the energy of it, or it's going this way or that way. It's like one thing leads to another, and then they kind of develop that way. And a lot of them at the end, like, were not going to be used, or, you know, going to edit it out. But it's kind of like the playful moment. Like, I just tell myself, like, I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to play and don't stress about it. You know, no pressure. You don't have to make it today. Just kind of let loose. But then once I get to this stage, it's more like, okay, let me see what happened here, and then recreate, render it, but kind of explore that, kind of, let's see, almost like what was happening in those moments of like spontaneity. It's kind of different. Yes.
Hi, great.
Hello, thank you.
I'm going to ask a pacing question. So, since you're classically trained, you probably also had a different drawing practice when you were painting figurations or from life, right? You kind of make marks knowing how you're going to paint them later. So, when you're doing your abstract drawings to paint from, are you also thinking in the pigments and brush strokes that you're maybe going to explore later, or do you literally just look at how the shapes are talking to each other?
Yeah, I don't think about the final painting because I don't know how it's gonna be or look like. But I guess I have certain materials that I keep using. There's always ink. I don't know, pastels and pencils and colored pencils and so different. It's almost like it's interesting not to think about it, so you like discover it, you know, later, and then you discover certain things that you might then like try to explore further. I guess that happens. Like a lot of things happen by accident, and then I would try to recreate them on purpose because it was like, oh, this was kind of interesting. Let me try to, like, for example, these cutouts, they were like by accident, they're like just thin paper, and now I realized like I really like the shadows, you know. So I bought like a thicker cardboard paper that will have like a thickness, so it would like actually make more of a distance between every layer. um, then little kind of blur smears and stuff. I realized that sometimes I make those ink drawings but I don't really like it, and then I wipe it because you can easily wipe it with alcohol. And then the wipe is interesting itself too, I realize. And then like, how would it be if I just one sheet is just the wipe thing, or if I use that as a stroke, like the erasure is a stroke. And then these dots also, first I would just have by accident a couple of dots would fall here and there. And then I realized those are very interesting. Plus, when you drop them, they're like different size, like smaller and bigger. So I had an idea to just make one sheet just with dots, and then each one, some are very small, some are bigger, so that gives like a perspective of the depth too. So yeah, I feel like a lot of those kind of inventions, ideas happen through drawings, but also in final paintings and going back and forth, kind of developing that way. If that answers the question.
Yeah, it looks really cool because I
Okay.
remember your work before this series, and this layering and slight shadowing thing literally very
Right.
directly, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's really cool to then connect your painting with that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone?
The like trompe-l'oeil layering thing is very interesting. How much narrative that brings up. Like it has this kind of like, I'm a scientist about to give a lecture on the Big Bang and I can't find the right slide kind of quality, but it makes them, to me, it's the most like contemporary anchoring element of it. And the last thing that you were talking about before it opened up to questions about this trepidation about like, can I make a mark? That feels like such a like new dilemma that I imagine being kind of tied to like our life with the internet. Or like we don't live in a world where we turn on the radio and things happen, have a chance. We have to always choose. We always have to be in this place of like, what is the movie gonna be? That I don't just turn on the TV. And the way in which this layering process like lets you get to the place of spontaneity, it's interesting to me how much that makes it feel contemporary. And then obviously there's like this sort of like screen tab window quality to the different layers going on. I guess I was just thinking about like, if you are thinking about narrative in this like layering element coming across.
I think those things like happen without us wanting to or not, because we live at this time.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't avoid by being a contemporary person. And I was thinking a lot about that. It wasn't like before, but after I started making these works, how it's like, oh, I guess like being drawn to this like trompe-l'oeil thing is like what is real and unreal, you know, it has to do a lot with the times we live in. It's almost like now we question everything you see in line. It's like, well, this is not real. No, this is real. This is a real person or not, or like what's happening, you know? It's kind of just like very like confusing time. So yeah, it's like, it's kind of interesting zone also. Like I don't even like kind of criticize anything. More like as an artist, you probably more like kind of observe things and absorb them. So I feel like that is kind of an interesting aspect of like assorting material and then transcribing it into something and turning it into like real or unreal. I mean, it's like ultimately paintings are like virtual reality. Like we've been doing it like forever with art, you know, like representing something, like it's a parallel universe that we're living in and creating. So, yeah. Did you want to ask?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, you got where I was
Okay.
going in a lot of ways, but I sometimes feel like abstract gets away with a lot of shit because
Right.
it's subjective and
Yeah.
one can see anything in it. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't really buy that. I don't buy that
Right.
like formalism
Right.
escapes some sort of a narrative. I think that we do have kind of like, even if there isn't a symbol in it, we can kind of have a sense of what's happening.
Yeah.
When I look around this room, I can't help but feel like schema is a word that keeps coming up for me, like diagrammatic, like a Rorschach. And I found that just as like a really interesting thing because, you know, Rorschach is meant to give a psychological portrait. It's meant to actually use the abstract to ground into a concrete thing. And so again, I keep like witnessing myself come around, but like,
What is it?
But what is it? But what is it?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's this weird meta-narrative that's happening. It's you playing with Rorschach, or with you playing with...
Yeah. I think that's what is the interesting part about, I don't want to say these works or abstract works, is that everyone can see different thing, you know, based on like you're saying, like, I see this because I grew up in a, you know, like hair salon, what do you say? You know, based on like your background, education, or psychology, or what we're used to seeing, or even the reality, we always see something. And I almost don't even want to say like what kind of forms I see, because then people are going to see that You know, I kind of like to keep it open for whatever you see, but
But isn't there a specific, like, are they anchored in a sort of specific psychological, you know, like
yeah.
the myth of arrival or
Mhm.
something? You know, don't you
Like-
feel like they're coming to one thing?
Well, it's like probably where I'm coming from, you know, they are going to be tied to what I'm interested in, if that's something. And then people will notice, kind of define that, right? Like I'm interested in science and like or bodies, evolution, I don't know, nature and so on, all of that putting together. So I kind of do, like that's also like how I am, you know, what I'm interested in. So even by making something like here's a line, you know, it's maybe it's going to come with all that sort of background. It's all going to be read in there. So it's like I don't have to almost like set a theme for myself when I come to studio, like this is what I'm doing, because I feel like it's already kind of there. You know, all those things that I was since painting like figures wrapped in plastic or whatever, or like childhood and this and that, you know, I feel like it doesn't have to be such an obvious like narrative that I'm saying. It's like kind of already there. It's like subconscious. And then I can just think about, I don't know, not think about anything, but it comes through. Maybe if that's.
When I've been in studio with you, I've always had the feeling like we're like kind of like you're looking at clouds or something, and you're like, you know, you're just kind of like passing the time looking, and you're like, oh, look at that dog. You know, like
Right, this is
you
like-
your
yeah.
relationship with your work sometimes when you're relaxing feels almost like you're like speculative Rorschach or something. You're
Well,
like,
yeah, always definitely kind of some faces and bodies, like, you know, but I don't want to point it out or even like naming the paintings. I don't want to give them like an obvious titles that would mean something. I was trying to like have it more like vague, so it doesn't have that kind of set tone or definition, or like trying to keep them open for interpretation. But I'm glad that people do notice things that I'm drawn to. You know, it's almost like, yeah, they all kind of, people feel the vibe, but it's not like I didn't tell it to them. It's just, you know, it's kind of like there, but it's not. I didn't have to like over explain it.
They really
No way.
look like where they come from too, like the cold. I mean, it's very hard for me to separate it from being in your studio, but the cold light and the kind of like, and the kind of like, and just the feeling of that building, it really looks like that to me, which is
The
I don't know
warehouse
if that's
studio
good or bad, but it
building,
really has
yeah.
that, look to me.
Okay, well,
yeah.
thank you all for coming and asking questions. Yeah, it was important for me also to share this. So, yeah, thank you.